half ago, I came back from a month-and-a-half tour of Europe, where I had gone partly for vacation and partly to see what was up in the intentional community scene, specifically the urban, income-sharing, egalitarian, non-violent, feminist, eco-groovy, democratically run commune scene in Europe. And I found very interesting things that sort of complemented and contrasted with my experience with egalitarian communities here in the US, which I have some experience with from living at Acorn for 9.5 years and being a delegate for our federation and sort of generally being interested. And so I gave a talk there about the communities that I found and comparing and contrasting. And Jill came, and Ian came, and Ed came, and thought it was cool and asked me to come. But that talk takes 2 hours, right? And I hear that it's very interesting, but it takes 2 hours, and I don't know if you all are particularly interested in it. And so I am here. I can share my experience with Acorn and with the Federation of Egalitarian Communities, but largely I was hoping that we could just have a dialogue and people could ask me questions and then I could rattle on, hopefully in an entertaining and informative fashion, for about an hour and just have the crowd sort of direct the conversation in that way. Fine question. So
in the definitions.
Yeah, so basically I could talk to you about the Federation of Egalitarian Communities and maybe what the examples are within that and what defines us. So I would say that the Federation of Egalitarian Communities is, as I was saying, primarily distinguished in the field of communes by its radical political and economic proposition. And the political and economic proposition lies sort of, in my conception, at the core of the communities and is complemented by the other principles that the communities hold. So at the heart of it, we say we are basically trying to live out the maxim from each according to their ability to each according to their need, right? So we come together and we pool all of our land, labor, resources, and income together, and then use that to provide for the members. So it varies by community within the Federation, but the ones that I'm most familiar with, Twin Oaks and Acorn, the general economic deal is that everybody contributes a set number of hours of labor per week to the commune. It's about 42 hours in the case of both Twin Oaks and Acorn. That labor is anything that it takes to sustain the community. So that is running the businesses, any sort of income-generating work, either working for hire or running the community businesses, but it's also the domestic labor. So that's cooking the food, maintaining the cars, watching the children, cleaning up, fixing the buildings, running the garden, but it's also all the administrative labor. So it's running the visitor program, going to meetings, writing policy, administering the internal community accounts, filing the taxes. It's anything that really is required to sustain the community socially. And in return for that labor contribution, the community takes care of all of your needs. So the community then, and those needs, because the communities are democratic. Acorn runs by consensus. We've got about 30 people. Twin Oaks, for bizarre historical reasons, they were started as inspired by Walden II, this book by B.F. Skinner, the behaviorist. And they have this slightly bizarre decision-making system called the planner-manager system, which is a consensus-inspired bureaucratic democracy, which takes 15 minutes to explain. But in both cases, they're at their core democratic in some way. And so it's the people who live at the community who are determining what those needs that the community is meeting are. But at base, it's, housing, food, transportation, medical care, and dental and eye care, but it's also entertainment, it's also child care. So it's sort of internet, access to computers, parties. It's whatever it is that we determine within that. And so a couple of things happen because of that. On the ecological front, right, the FEC communities, by and large, although they hold sustainability as a value, do not hold sustainability as the primary value, right? The income sharing, the egalitarianism, democracy, these are the primary values. And we try to be good stewards of the earth. But the interesting thing that happens, and Mary was alluding to this in her check-in, simply by sharing so intensely, because when you commit to income sharing, and you commit to holding these resources commonly, the default mode of economic action and organizing is collective, right? As opposed to, in our current mainstream economy, the default mode is to handle things individually, to generate your own private income and to spend that private income meeting your needs. And then if you want to share and work collectively, that's something that you do specially. That's an exception that you make. Whereas with an income sharing system, the default, the easiest thing to do is to do it collectively. And you actually have to work out some special deal in order to take care of needs individually. Because then you have to be able to generate private income and then spend that private income. And what happens when we do this is that we share very intensely, we cooperate very intensely. And Twin Oaks did a study of its resource consumption some years ago and discovered that they're using roughly 20% of the national average in every easily measurable category. 20% of the electricity that the average American uses, 20% of the gasoline that the average American uses. They're producing 20% of the solid waste that the average American produces. And this is without anything particularly unusual infrastructurally. For the most part, actually, Twin Oaks lives in some ramshackle, they're like been improved over the years, but they're, generally speaking, amateur-built buildings that they've then, tacked onto and made into respectable houses over their time. There's only one building that they consider like an ecological residence with super insulation and solar panels and that sort of thing. The rest of those gains are being made simply by cooperation. And so by cooperating so intensely, they become ecologically sustainable operations. And if you then put in more stuff like solar panels and more intense like standard issue green living stuff, their impact would shrink even more. The statistic is particularly interesting because this might be a couple years old now, but a couple years ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was saying that we had to reduce our carbon footprint by 80% by 2050 in order to save ourselves from catastrophic climate change. And Twin Oaks, without trying very hard, just by collectivizing this way, sort of has already hit that 80% reduction standard. So then also we identify as feminist. By that we mean that people are treated equally and have equal opportunity regardless of gender or sexuality. And that manifests itself in our culture just by trying to live by feminist values. But the intense sharing and the collectivization of our economy also makes that easier because it eliminates, for instance, the gender-based pay differential that you see in the mainstream society. It eliminates the sort of extra economic burden that is often placed on women around domestic work or around reproductive work, because the community is able to say that this domestic work is community valued labor and childcare is community valued labor. And at Twin Oaks, at least, they have a program where childcare is valued by the community. The way that they do things is that they generate budgets for different areas in hours and dollars. And when a child is born, it gets a budget that can be spent on its childcare. And essentially, you have a full person year's worth of labor for the first, I think, 3.5 years of your child's life. And then it doesn't end, it just tapers off slowly until they get to their teen years. And so that sort of the burden of having and raising children is collectivized and socialized as much as possible. In addition to having the principle of labor, as you noticed, was that everybody is expected to do 42 hours of labor a week. That's not like 42 internal currency credits or something like that. It's 42 hours of labor, regardless of productivity and regardless of what type of labor is being done. So the income-producing work, doing sales, doing order fulfillment, doing customer service, managing the businesses, managing the money, all of that is just as valuable as fixing cars, is just as valuable as growing the food, is just as valuable as cooking, is just as valuable as looking after the kids. Everything is worth 1 hour if you spend an hour on it. And so that at Twin Oaks, so the question was whether there's a system for keeping track of that. And I have been describing sort of Twin Oaks here as a model that we can generalize, but there is a lot of variation across the communities of the FEC. And I think something like half of them actually keep track of labor and half of them do not. Twin Oaks very much keeps track of labor. Twin Oaks is a very organized, very paper-based community and has a very bureaucratic sort of social control system and organizational system, which means that they generate incredibly good statistics, but they also spend a fair amount of labor doing all of the accounting, both in budgeting, in sort of organizing that labor, and then also in reporting those hours. At Acorn, which forms an interesting counterpoint in many ways, Acorn, we also have a requirement that everybody do 42 hours of labor a week, but we don't spend any of that time budgeting those hours. We rely on the members of the community to be in communication with each other and sort of holding the collective project in mind and communicating with each other on the fly in order to determine where the labor needs are and how to distribute our attention and our responsibility. So we do not have budgeting in that way. We do not coordinate numerically our economy, and we do not actually report the hours that we do. So there is a 42-hour requirement, but nobody is reporting it. So in fact, the way that it works out is that it does not appear so much as like a strict accounting requirement. What it appears more as is a standard to adjust yourself to when you join the community, to be able to check yourself again. What it means is that we, sort of the deeper level is that we expect full members of the community to be equitably sharing in the labor and in the responsibility of running the community. And that, even deeper than that, what really matters is not whether or not you're doing your 42 hours of labor a week or whether you're taking on your perfectly equitable share. What matters is whether or not people are happy and feel taken care of. So if people are happy and they feel taken care of, then they're not going to have a problem with you. Right, so the question is slackers. What do we do about slackers? And so for Acorn, that system, that requirement of 42 hours of labor a week, and that expectation that you take on an equitable amount of both labor and responsibility, sort of the work and the worry of the community, is sitting there underneath as the formal requirement. And if people do not feel happy and taken care of, then that's what we check. Then we say, are you at least doing this minimum that you agreed to as a member, right? And that's generally when it comes up. People don't feel taken care of, then they come and they say, hey, are you doing your 42 hours of labor a week? Hey, are you looking to try to find places that you can take responsibility in? If it seems like you're slacking on either of those points. And we have a process of resolving interpersonal conflicts as a community that we can call up, because ultimately the problems are, the problem does not end up being financial particularly, does not end up being economic, it ends up being emotional. It ends up being whether or not the caretaking is actually going on. And so we both see a person's economic involvement in the community as legitimate community business, and so it can come up at a meeting, you can come to somebody with it and they can't dismiss it as you're being nosy or something like that. But also if it is this sort of emotional problem of not feeling taken care of, feeling like you're taking advantage of your fellow community members, then we also have this interpersonal conflict resolution process. And that gets called on by us not frequently, but regularly, I would say, and especially in the case of new members who are still adjusting to the culture and figuring out what it looks like to be a co-responsible member of the community. So, and I'd like to say, it is a great theory, and it's been working for us for many years, with hiccups at times, and right now, for the past several years that I've been there, it's been operating very smoothly. And I think that what we've done is that when you have enough sort of longevity and continuity with members, and you've built a culture of labor and of responsibility, things flow smoothly, almost regardless probably of what system underlies it.
Can you talk about the average income that you need to make when
Right. So this was the really cool thing that Mary alluded to in her check-in, is that so I've been collecting statistics from a bunch of the U.S. Federation of Egalitarian Communities, communes, and also from the communities that I visited in Europe. I collected information as well, and Twin Oaks is one shining example, right? Twin Oaks, if you go there, they're living rurally, so they do a lot of things for themselves. It looks like a small village sort of farm. The pieces of their lifestyle, they're leading at least a comfortable lifestyle, possibly a middle-class lifestyle, in some ways an upper-middle-class lifestyle. They have access to as much vehicle use as they want, right? They have a fleet of cars for all of their uses. They have people who cook beautiful, organic, healthy meals for them twice a day, and they have, all of their food is provided for, all of their health care is taken care of. They have, regular movies, they have a pond, they have a sauna, they have beautiful lands, and they do all of this, right, and support themselves, have, extensive child care. You have, like, this huge amount of babysitting, essentially, and, paid child care provided by the community. And Twin Oaks is able to do it. Their per capita income reported on their taxes varies between, in the years that I've been there, between $4,000 and $6,000 a year per member. And that's what it takes to support them in this lifestyle. At Acorn, where we're still investing a great deal of money in our infrastructure, we're a younger community. Twin Oaks has a much bigger internal economy. We're doing it on between $11,000 and $13,000 per person per year. So, Twin Oaks is having this very comfortable lifestyle at half of the U.S. poverty line, and Acorn is skirting the poverty line.
I think the key point there is Twin Oaks has a lot of capital. They've got land, they've got buildings, they've got businesses.
It's true.
You can live on a small income if you've got all this capital and all this infrastructure. So that's wealth. They have
Right.
wealth.
It's true, and they've spent many years building up that wealth, and I don't know what the historical numbers for them are, but I know that for Acorn, I've been there for half of Acorn's life, and we've invested extensively in our infrastructure, and we're still operating at the poverty line and always have been. Our income is higher than it's ever been at $13,500 per member per year, and we're living arguably a better lifestyle than Twin Oaks is. We also have infinite coffee. Twin Oaks has limited coffee.
Another observation, I think, that there is an ethos of voluntary simplicity where people there's not excessive consumption and all this stuff. People are willing to live in small bedrooms and not have a ton of personal stuff.
It's
You can
true.
live collectively and still spend a lot.
Right.
It could be so
Right.
I think
And so I totally agree with what Karen's saying, which is about your particular resource use, that the key to having these savings is by breaking out of the individualist economic mindset of saying, instead of thinking about meeting my needs by having my property, you think of how can I have my needs met collectively, like just the sort of in the current hip economy talk, we're moving beyond the age of ownership to the age of access, right? And this is what the communes are at already. So it's you don't have a living room, right? You have a bedroom. That's how the FEC communes generally work. You live in a dormitory style way. Your personal space is your bedroom. Beyond that, it's all public. So you don't have a kitchen, and you don't have a bathroom, and you don't have a living room, except actually you have a bunch of kitchens, and you have a bunch of bathrooms, and you have a bunch of living rooms. And if you just have the right number, then you have access to bathrooms and kitchens and living rooms and cars and computers as much as you want, if you're able to cooperate with people and share.
When that's not happening.
Twin Oaks, one of their statistics is that the average group of 100 Americans owns 75 or so cars, and Twin Oaks has 17. Yeah, so that's 60 cars that that group of 100 people does not have to purchase and maintain. There's a savings. And when I'm talking about the per capita income or per capita expense of living at these income sharing communities, it's true that it's not income sharing that's actually creating these savings, right? It's expense sharing. It's collaborative consumption. It's collaborative ownership. It's this cooperative ownership. But what the income sharing does is that it, as I was saying, it switches your default. Your default is not an individual economy from which you then make exceptions to go into this collective economy. The default is the collective economy. And so by taking on income sharing, you are pretty much guaranteeing that that your economy is going to be super collective, because you're going to have to consciously make it individualistic at that point. And so what happens is that because that's the mindset and because that's the default, the FEC, the income sharing communities, have a tendency to be consuming and owning collectively and cooperatively at an incredibly high rate. And what they see out of that, as you were saying, is that you have abundance with lower expenses. In addition, we find that the income sharing helps us to accomplish our other goals, like feminism and sort of anti-classism, and basically creating a more humane way of life that values people's contribution to society, in our case our micro-society, equally, instead of having the market-based, you're trading your labor for whatever you can negotiate on the market.
I was just going to say, at Twin Oaks there were definitely slackers. When I lived there, and if someone really slacked too much, I mean, everyone knew, and they kind of were pushed out of the community in one way or the other. I mean, sometimes there was some kind of formal process, and sometimes the people just left. But in my ideal world, we'd actually see that as a dysfunctional, the person's having something come up because they lived in this dysfunctional culture, and how can we heal the person? Not invest like years of time, but can we invest some time from a loving way? And in my experience at Twin Oaks was a lot of times there was this victim, villain kind of mentality and other mentality that would push someone out instead of saying, well, what's going on here? Yeah, fix the problem. I mean, we're all projecting stuff onto each other, and, you can collectively project on one person. The other thing is that person, where are they coming from? What's going on? Can we do something to help this person heal this issue? I think if someone's not productive, it's not from who they want to be. It's from a wound. So, yeah. Or we attract one more person that does the same thing.
And another thing that we find is in the Federation, like, no two communities in the Federation actually have exactly the same systems, economically and politically. And what we also find is that by having this Federation, sort of, we are stronger as a Federation because a person might not work out in one community, and they might end up burning their bridges or destroying their relationships, or the community just doesn't like them, but they'll move to another Federation commune, and then they'll be a star of the commune, either because the system works better for them, or because they're learning, as they're going, and they're growing as a person, because we're not static people, And I think
it's all relationships, so when you get in an optimized relationship, whatever community you find yourself in, you find yourself plugged into the resources with what we were talking about here, where if you find a problem or find yourself in a position where you're not able to provide that minimum that you agreed to in the community pulls you aside and says, hey, what's up? How come you can't provide what we agreed to in the beginning? What's going on with that? And then you talk about why you can't provide that, and then you have a discussion and you heal the wound, and you let the person grow, and you grow from the experience, and everybody kind of returns to the abundance and back to what they're going on. A relationship either continues in that pattern, or it may evolve to another pattern or another place. It's my experience.
Yeah, right now there's still, I think it's, I don't know if it's this exact same, I haven't been to Twin Oaks in a couple years now, but I think there's kind of a punishment idea, which is the same as in the mainstream culture. And so, like, if you are behind in labor, you don't have much choice but to lie about it, you know, if you don't want to get kicked out. So, at least that was my impression.
Yeah, and the sort of balance for that is that all of the communes do have expulsion proceedings, and they do have standards they hold people to, and the different communities are sort of better or worse or different in how they deal with interpersonal conflict or people not meeting their requirements. But all of the, well, I don't know, both Twin Oaks and Acorn at least, and I think most of the communes, are not quick to kick out. And in fact, it's very difficult to expel members as far as expulsion goes. And so all of the communities have processes that you get caught up in. You're not just fired, you know. There's nobody who can just kick you out. It's a whole community process that's designed to pull you into it and bring the whole community into dialogue with you. And the fine points, living at Acorn, which is very similar to Twin Oaks, and when it differs from Twin Oaks, it differs from Twin Oaks intentionally. I also have criticisms of how Twin Oaks is set up, and I think it gets subtle sometimes in exactly whether or not it's dysfunctional and how largely the community is quite functional.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't mean to.
What kind of actual data are we analyzing to look at outcomes? And has that thing of us looking at structure, eliminating structure, seeing different.
So the communities directory put together by the Fellowship of Intentional Communities it's a big database, as Mary was saying, and they've taken a bunch of different qualities that intentional communities can have, and they've pegged everybody as in these various categories, and so you can do a lot of sifting and sorting and comparing in that way. I don't know of anybody who's managed to quantify in a robust way the systems and outcomes from any of these communes and compare them in a massive fashion, because the systems are so complex and the particularities of like the outputs that you could be looking at are diverse. Like, yeah, you know, there's not even like I guess we could be applying the UN's Human Development Index internally. That might work, but it's like choosing how to quantify your analysis is a tricky business. So when I do comparison and compare and contrasts, I just straight up compare the systems, and then I'll also, if I'm feeling feisty, I might compare the experiences reported by people in those systems. But the experiences, even within a single community, are incredibly diverse. So it's a difficult proposition.
The income sharing communities in Europe. Can you talk a little bit about those in comparison to Twin Oaks and Acorn?
Yeah. So the talk about the European communes, as I was saying, the one that I've got worked up that goes into detail takes 2 hours, but there are two big takeaways for me from my European commune tour. So one is that the Federation of Egalitarian Communities, of which we are a part, operates in the U.S. and has 7 communities that are within the Federation. So there's only so much variation within that. Because we have this very fine filter. You have to be secular, which takes care of half the intentional communities in the U.S. You have to be income sharing, that kicks out pretty much everybody else. And then also, democratic and nonviolent, and those are easier to hit upon. But inside of those 7 communities, there are 2 particularly large ones, Twin Oaks at 100 adults and Eastwind at 70 adults. And then the next largest would be us at Acorn at 30 adults, and everybody else is smaller than that. And Twin Oaks and Eastwind use non-consensus democratic decision-making systems. Twin Oaks, again, uses this consensus-inspired bureaucratic democracy, highly idiosyncratic, and Eastwind just uses straight-up majority rule. And there's, I think, a widespread impression in the culture generally and within the FEC that difference is a difference because of size. That the consensus really only works with a small, intimate group of people, right? Now, what's interesting is when I used to give tours for Acorn for many years, and I would say, okay, here at Acorn, we're whatever we were at the time, 10, 20, 30 people. We run by consensus. And Twin Oaks at 100 people runs by blah, 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 blah. And people go, oh, well, that makes sense because you're so small. But actually, Twin Oaks has been using its wacky-ass system since it was 15 people, right? So it's a cultural difference. It's not like they're trying consensus for a long time and they're like, this is just too hard. Let's make up this really wacky system to do it instead. And Eastwind as well. They were started by Twin Oaks, and they've been doing majority rule since the get-go. But generally speaking, at Acorn we've been growing in the time that I've been there, and I've been there when we were 7 people, and I'm there now when we're 30 people. And every couple of years we have a conversation about whether or not the community should grow. And every time that we have that conversation, there's a range of opinion in the room. The majority of people saying, well, I kind of like the size that we are, or maybe we could add a couple more people, but I'm afraid that if we grew beyond 5 more people, that we just wouldn't be able to do consensus, So then we grow by a few more people, and it's not a problem. We have the conversation again, so it's at 10, oh, we can't grow more than 15, and then we're at 15, oh, we can't grow more than 20, and then we're at 20, oh, we can't grow more than 25, and it still works, it works just the same. And I went to Europe because in the first commune that I visited is commune Sandford in Denmark. And they have 80 people, and they operate by consensus. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. I have to go there, and I have to talk to them, and I have to find out what sort of incredibly exotic mechanisms they're using to make consensus work at this incredibly high number of people. And I went there, and I asked them, so what do you do to make it work? And they're like, I don't know. We get together in a room, and we talk about things, and we come to consensus.
Imagine that.
It's like, it's not that hard, actually. But I think we're about as big as we can get. If we got beyond 5 more people, it totally wouldn't work.
So it's the same story.
They're not American, that's true. They're bizarre Europeans. Yeah. And then after that, I went to Germany and visited this commune, the Commune Niederkufungen in Kassel, and they've got 60 people. And they use consensus. And again, they were nonplussed by my question. They're like, I don't know, we get together and we talk about it. But if we had 5 more people, it probably wouldn't work, And so, and they are doing interesting things within that to make the conversation flow more easily, to make the process happen quicker. They do a lot of work in small groups. They post proposals. They make decisions over a period of weeks if they're not in a big hurry. But they're not doing anything super exotic. And neither the Commune Niederkufungen or Svenholm has a mandatory group interpersonal process. They are in that way similar to Twin Oaks, which also doesn't have a mandatory group interpersonal process. And they have people that hate each other. They have people that are kind of disillusioned and withdrawn from the political process. But still, consensus works. And, one of the things when I talk about consensus is, I've been of the opinion for a while, so maybe this is self-serving bias, but I've been of the opinion for a while that it's not size that determines whether or not consensus can work. Because I also stayed at Christiania, this anarchist squat neighborhood in Copenhagen. That it's like the anarchist city within a city, and they've got 600 people, many of whom are incredibly difficult apparently, and are alcoholics. They're just they're the social misfits from Denmark that go to Christiania, and they operate by consensus. And so my opinion and what I've drawn from this is that I have been in consensus situations that are totally dysfunctional at 7 people, and are totally functional at 30, and seem to be doing okay at 600. And so there are qualities that make consensus work and make it not work, improve and sort of destroy your process, but it's not size. It might be, it might be culture or something, but it's not whether or not you have an effective mandatory interpersonal process. It's probably skill and experience with consensus. It's probably the wisdom of your systems. Who knows? But it's not size.
So consensus.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, what do you think are the most important factors?
I think that for me, I think that the group culture is actually the most important thing. That if the people who are in the consensus process are committed to being stewards of some mission or stewards of this group and are not thinking, what do I want, but are thinking, what is the best thing to be done for the group, then you have a place where you can reach compromise and where you can work with each other. And so I think that the most important thing for me is having that, both having that culture, but also, so there's like having the culture that people are engaged in this sort of project and not after their own sort of particular political opinion and agenda. But also, consensus and being in meetings is a skill set. And it's a skill set that is not taught in American schools, at least as far as I know. And this is why, in my opinion, you hear horror stories about meetings throughout the corporate world and the non-corporate world. It's like people are like, oh my God, these people are just like going on tangents or going up late or just talking over people. Or, it's like, because it's totally a skill set to be in a cooperative meeting. And it's a skill set that we have to be teaching people. And once people have this skill set, then meetings are easy.
Can you give us an example, though, if, like, let's say that I make a proposal and it doesn't fly doesn't fly with everybody. What type of thing? You said at one point that at the other meeting that the dissenter will go with the group.
Yeah.
But, like, so what are some of the tools that you guys use to work around that to try to see if there's a way
so
you can
a couple of the communes in Europe that use consensus and make extensive use of small working groups will do things where a proposal will come up, it'll be discussed. If it's not an easy one to find consensus on, if there's disagreement, then they won't necessarily hash it out in the meeting. They'll hash it out for a bit, and then they'll choose people with representative opinions, and they'll put them in a group together and tell them to go away and work on it in the time between that and the next meeting. The idea being that if those hopefully representative people can come to an agreement, that when it comes up at the meeting again, everybody else will be like, yeah, it sounds great. So-and-so was totally, standing up for my opinion, and now it all works out. At Acorn, which we don't use small groups a lot, we just hash it out in the meetings. We have a very casual consensus process. For us, it would be, you would bring a proposal. We'd discuss it a bit to figure out what it is that you're actually proposing. And then people who have concerns, like they're not saying, I'm blocking this. It's raising of concerns. It's, well, I have this concern that blah, blah will happen, or it'll be too expensive, or And then what we have is we have the things that you're trying to accomplish and the things I'm trying to accomplish, or the things I'm trying to safeguard, the concerns that I have. And then as a group, we're trying to figure out how you can get your aims accomplished while meeting my concern. And the philosophy that overlays the consensus process for us is that the proposal and the concerns are not owned by the individual. They are owned by the group, and they're the group's responsibility to work on. Now, of course, the individual is very important because they're the ones that are putting these forward, and often there will be a dialogue with them. But the point is that the whole process is the collective responsibility of the group to work on and work out. I don't think so. So the question is whether it's like we're trying to create value for the opposition. Yes, in that it becomes ultimately valuable and important. What we're trying to do is basically, you can think of it in the ideal abstract sense. We have a group mission, right? And we're all stewards of this group mission. And Jill is saying, in order to advance our group mission, I think we should do blah. We should buy a new lawnmower or whatever, Like, part of our mission is having short grass. And then I would come in and say, yes, but actually, like, I have a concern, that the lawnmower we get is not going to be able to be used by people who aren't very strong, so we should get a self-propelled lawnmower. Or it's too gas in it, we should get an electric lawnmower,
There you go.
And so this is like, well, okay, we're both stewards of the mission, and we're trying to figure out how best to advance that group mission.
Well, I thought you kind of validated my question by saying you're going into it with a common goal agenda. I think that
Right.
is the takeaway there.
Yeah.
Well, I would just add that underneath that there are values that are shared by the group. And so usually these concerns or whatever, someone has a proposal, they have a value they're trying to stand behind. Like, oh, we need the lawnmower because we believe in aesthetically pleasing, living environment. But then someone else may be like, oh, but we don't want to have a gas one because we want to conserve fossil fuels, so they have these environmental values. Or, we're concerned about the people that can't push it, a value of caring for those, especially maybe those with
Mobility issues.
impairments,
Yeah.
mobility issues. So a lot of it comes down to balancing those values.
Yeah.
So we get one that runs on veggie oil.
Right.
It can be driven around by anybody.
The
And we're
goats.
good.
Here it is. I don't know if you've heard of Laird Schaub, Executive Secretary of the FIC Fellowship for Intentional Community. He's a master facilitator, and he's developed a facilitation training course. It's 8 3-day weekends where he's teaching these skills, and he has other facilitators he works with. His wife, Whyte, is often teaches with him. But it's an amazing course, and I do think there's a lot of value as your group is trying to birth this shared culture. It's helpful to have a midwife that can kind of guide you through that process and help you while you're learning this. If you get a chance to work with Laird, he'll be at the communities conference. I highly recommend it.
And this is, yeah, I'm going to second that in a different way to say again, like, this goes back to the fact that meetings, cooperative meetings, and consensus is totally a skill set. And you should not assume that you can just say consensus and we can all do it. Like, having trainings, having experience with the process is essential to having a process that you like at the end. Instead of coming out at the end and being, oh man, consensus totally sucks. It takes forever and we just spend all the time arguing. It's like, it's a skill. Develop the skill. And I wanted to say a bit in response to your question that, yeah, that I did, like, our understanding of politics, if we're just looking at the American mainstream, is an oppositional process where different groups with competing agendas are vying for power. And the consensus process makes that totally silly, because with consensus, any one person can block the entire process. Everyone has to agree to push it forward. So it cannot be a struggle over power. It has to be a collective work to accomplish a common mission. So. I don't know if I'm entirely...
I think she's saying, does it all have to go through group consensus, or can we make individualized decisions?
Is that what you're
on
asking,
small
whether all the
pieces?
decisions? And the question is, do all decisions have to come to the consensus group? And the answer is, I mean, if you really want to, but for our communities, no. The vast majority of decisions about how to run the commune are made at a lower level than the meeting. In all of the communes that I know, not just the ones that are run by consensus. Most of the decisions are being made on an individual level by the people who are doing the work or taking responsibility for that particular area. And what happens, the things that rise up, and this is the principle that I am most familiar with at Acorn, but that is generally the principle of any sort of effective governance, is that the decisions rise up to the level at which they must be made. So the things that get to the consensus group are questions that affect the whole community. So for us, it would be most things, most purchases, most decisions about how to accomplish the community's tasks are made at an individual level, or those people who encounter the question will talk to other people who are sort of in related work. The things that get to the community are questions of policy. They're questions of varying from the established status quo. So like an individual person taking responsibility for an area will think, okay, my responsibility is to accomplish this goal in this way that the community has been doing forever. Keep the cars fixed, right? But if we're going to vary significantly from the status quo, like convert them all to veggie oil or whatever, or we're going to take on some extraordinary expense, so large, unusual purchases, those will come to the community level because it's a change in the status quo, it's a difference in how the community normally operates, and we want everybody to be informed.
Oh, you need to leave in about 5 minutes.
Okay.
I was wondering if, so I was thinking that a fair number of people here probably are not really all in for income sharing and so forth. What do you think is sort of biggest takeaway from your perspective that you're providing here for a less ambitious project that's not income sharing but it's co-housing or something like most important principles or techniques besides like learning how to have a consensus meeting perhaps or something like that for less ambitious sort of endeavors.
You want to think on that?
I think
I
that
got a little something for that.
Sure.
Okay. So, less ambitious. While we're talking about it, I'm just going to plant a seed and you can go from there. What has worked well for me, regardless of individual communities, living together communities, lots of different experiences that I could spend eternities defining. What really, really works well is looking at yourself, coming to a skillful relationship with yourself, and saying, what can I do to facilitate exchanges that occur for the benefit and the well-being of all beings, patterns, and energies? By doing this, you cover yourself and your own dreams, and you're still respectfully doing everything that you can to provide your resources and your energy to your neighbors and anyone else interested in the dream that may not necessarily be able to work with you directly.
And I would say that it's hugely dependent upon what you're trying to do. But that if you're not going to do, like, income sharing is very important to me, for one thing because I'm very interested in the economy, and for another because I see it as being this elegant way to strike at the heart of so many things that I find problematic about society, from like inegalitarian access to resources and wealth to just sort of an inhumane economy to one that pollutes to, like excessive consumption, blah, 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 all these things. And also, feminism, and that it just sort of, that it brings us more into looking at the world as a cooperative endeavor, which is really, when you look at, okay, I'm going to stand.
Okay.
So,
Hey, you want this one?
sure, I'll take that one.
Yeah.
Right, so there's, so I think, so let's see, now I'll try to answer both questions at once. Which is, so the income sharing is very important. But the other things that I've found particularly important is, like, learning how to do consensus decision making. Even if you're not using consensus, even if you're using a majority rule system, even if you're using a consensus minus X number of people, or whatever other system you come up with, the values that underlie the consensus process are amazing. Because what they do is that they're changing, as I said, they're changing our understanding of the way that we cooperate from an oppositional one, where we are competing for power and resources in order to meet our needs, to a cooperative one where we are trying to figure out how to engage with the people around us to collectively meet our needs. It's saying, I don't have to fight other people and take from them in order to meet my needs. We can all have our needs met if we can figure out how to cooperate, right? And so regardless of what you're doing, if you're able to take that philosophy even if you end up having to fight with people, if you're taking that philosophy at the base, I think that you're going to have a better time of it as a collective.
For anybody that has experience with communities that are more than self-sustaining, anybody here that more than self-sustaining, that creates an abundance that could be shared with people outside of that community and be transferred to another community?
Well, I mean,
Yeah, generally they should all be resulting in that.
and Twin Oaks has generated, at this point, 4 new communes out of its excess.
And the other answer is that I know a lot of local kitchen communities who they serve their vegetables from places who were not
Yeah.
quite to the level you're talking about, but
Yeah.
at least the pathway's already there. It's just a matter of advertising your school and getting, maybe we've got this too, take our pitch.
Wait a few more minutes.
I don't think it would be hard to be that productive, to generate younger people, and then if each community could focus on generating surpluses in different areas.
So,
School living community land trust model where we create this land fund and then we can acquire more land and kind of self-sustaining.
so that, so then the 2 other things. Another thing is that, for me at least, at Acorn, I have very much enjoyed living in a community that does have a community interpersonal process. We aren't a particularly touchy-feely group, and some people are, and that's great. But we don't consider ourselves a touchy-feely group. A lot of people living there would not think that we're like doing transparency tools or intimacy building, but in fact we are. We have a process of checking in with each other about our relationships and creating an opportunity and a forum for people to resolve conflicts, and even ones that don't seem like important enough to actually have a conflict about. You know, just like assumptions you might make about somebody's stories, rumors, this sort of thing. We have a forum that puts people in a place where it is easier for them to talk about those things and clear and air those things. And what I found is that even though not everybody engages with the process in the same way, you know, some people are just sort of, it's called our clearness process, and people are expected to have conversations about their relationship. And oftentimes people will say, hey, are we clear? Great, yeah, I love you, great. And some people will sit down for half an hour, and really hash things out. But having that process, at least having some sort of process of bringing people together and working on your relationships, does oodles for making it easier to cooperate and for making it easier to work together and establishing the trust that ultimately makes any sort of system work better. So then the last thing was that question about income sharing, if we're not doing full income sharing. So, yeah, and I think that you have a lot of examples of communities that are doing different levels of expense sharing, right? And the expense sharing is where you hit on all of these efficiencies, as far as being able to consume and own collectively and think about your material life as guaranteeing access to the things that you need to meet your needs, rather than having to own everything that you need to meet your needs. And so, if you're not going to do income sharing, figuring out how much expense sharing you can do and how much collaborative consumption and collaborative ownership you can do will yield all sorts of great economic benefits. And of course, you also have situations, lots of situations where people will be living collectively, and maybe they'll have a social rent system where your rent will be pegged to your income or something else, other formulas. But what I've found with the income sharing communities, and actually as well in Germany, there was one community that I talked to, which was an urban commune of about 20 adults, and they actually they're 12 years old as a community, and they only started income sharing 5 years ago. They tried a bunch of these other things. They had to write an adjusted rent, they tried a voluntary rent, they tried smaller income sharing groups. And what they found, and what I believe I have found, is that there's a qualitative difference when you jump to full income sharing in what you can do and how sort of easy it makes all of these things. How easy it makes both the economic benefits of sharing and also the social benefits of creating a more sort of humane and person-directed, intentionally directed economy that accomplishes all of these social goals that you might have. But Karen had a quick thing.
Oh, sorry.
And then I've got to leave.
Yeah, Heathcote, I was part of an income sharing group for 5 years, but we only had 3 people, and we didn't have our own business. We weren't generating income together. We were working at jobs and then pooling our income. And I feel from that experience, we didn't experience all those benefits. And so I think there's something about possibly having a large enough scale, enough people doing it, and possibly about having your own business, generating the income together rather than working in jobs.
Well, I'll say a quick thing, right? So I've visited a bunch of different income sharing groups, and I think that the scale is important, and the internal businesses are not, because there are a lot of urban communes, and a lot of these, like, a bunch of the communes that I visited in Europe are not fully supported internally, like a lot of the rural FEC communes are. And some of them, this urban one I was just talking about, everybody works for themselves. Either they're self-employed or they are hired by somebody else.
No, well, yeah, definitely. There's definitely that. I mean, once you're focused on the other rather than yourself, then you can live truly successfully in community. I've had a group of people who came to our community to live with us that were focused, their existence was focused on, they were travelers. And so they're the people who ride the rails, who, you know, sleep under bridges, and their existence is all about what they can get each moment, what I can have, what am I going to have tomorrow, what can I hold. And so when it came to them being in our community, it was very glaringly different. Beautiful people, loving people, but their intention was having rather than what can I bring to the community. It was a difference in culture. I thought because they had dreadlocks and they smoked pot and smelled like patchouli, they were going to be matching some of the people that hang with us. They were fundamentally different because their culture is not about, hey, I have this, can you, it's about, I'm going to need to eat that tomorrow. Yeah, and it's like no aspersion on them. It's just a different way of living, and their intention is different. Yeah. And so it's important when you're living in intention in a community to pay attention to that aspect. Are these people really living the way I want to live or not? And if not, then let's talk about it. Right, because those have been the largest disparities I've had in community, is when our intentions are not similar. Oh, it's very cool to live here where there's apples every day. It is, especially when you're out there and you don't live in a place where there's apples every day. I get it, but listen, you have to bring some apples.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I like apples every day
too. It's really cool to live here to bring apples.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful feeling when I come home from the grocery store and I know I brought a huge thing of bananas and we've been out of bananas for a day and a half. That joy is a real, valuable thing I get out of living in community.
Yep.
Oh my God, there's a big thing. It's not because I have bananas, because I know somebody's going to get up in the morning like, banana, we're out. That's what you get out of being in community. If you don't have that, you can't live in community. And you have to look for that very clearly in people to live with, I think. Because the more they have that, the better it is. It's like, oh, bananas. It's simple. I bought 5 extra bananas and I got joy out of that. And I may not have even gotten a friggin' banana this time.
But it doesn't matter because I'm living in such abundance.
Right, somebody else got mangoes yesterday, and I wouldn't have bought mangoes, but damn, I had mangoes. It's just a simple 1 + 1, and I mean, I know we're all committed to it, but I live it every day, and I've been living it for a decade, and I love it. I love having bananas and mangoes.
Do you have a particular system in place to make sure that there are mangoes, or to make sure?
I'm a to live with. I'm very clear about the intention of the house. No, but I can be. I'm not conflict averse. So if somebody's not saying it, I'm the guy in the community who's going to say, look, did you really buy mangoes? Look, I haven't seen mangoes in a week or 2. So, I mean, that guy's not always good to have in the community, but I think but I do it out of love.
He also writes on a whiteboard things like, please start buying food people are beginning to notice. And
It's like, oh, is he talking about me? It's like, oh yeah, no, and it is. It's also not being a dick too. It's like, oh, the floors are crying out for your love. You know, and then a little sketch on the whiteboard with the floors crying. You're like, all right, I haven't watched the floor. It's like, people want, if you choose the right people, they want to live beautifully in community. but we're all selfish.
Also,
I all have my thing going. I have a meeting tomorrow night. I have something next. I can't. Oh wait, the floors are dirty. All right, you know.
One of Doug's like life hacks is that whenever he's like really pissed, he'll write a note on a heart-shaped piece of paper and leave those notes around for people to do stuff, and it's always like friendly because it's not a heart.
No, when I saw heart-shaped Post-it notes, they changed the whole snarkiness of leaving little notes, because I know some people it's a trigger.
Yeah.
In group houses, if they're on a heart note and you put a smiley face, even if you're pissed when you're writing that note, you drank all my beer. Heart note, smiley face. Oh, I did. I drank all the beer. Oh, yeah. And it's really, those are just subtle, interpersonal things.
It does make
you know? And, yeah.
I think that's one of those things where it's like, it's what you were kind of saying earlier. It's like, me as a person, like, I'm a very functional individual, but like I cannot remember every little friggin' thing that I have to do.
Right.
And I write, like, if I'm at my job, I write out reminders for myself, and people are like, "You're telling me to do this." I'm like, "No, I need that reminder too." Like, it's not just about you. So I think that's a really nice way of like kind of keeping each other in check in a sense that you can all live together. And
our house, throughout the house, I went out and bought beautifully cut and scrolled engraved little tiny 4x4 frames. And then I had one of the artists in the house paint them in a beautiful way. But in those frames, I put bright pink pieces of paper, and written on the piece of paper and scroll, "Please leave no trace." And I put them up all over the house. So they're little art pieces. But so when you have people over, it's a gentle, beautiful. It's not a Post-it note. It's definitely not a Post-it note. It's something that's solid and left there in the house. So but it reminds all of us, supposedly. I mean, but it does. And that's the kind of thing. It's like, people want to be reminded. I want to be better than I am.
Beautiful friend. This is the end. My only friend. The end. Doesn't seem to be hard. Doesn't seem to be hard.